We're talking about the number two mistake that writers make when they begin, that it's an obstacle for them to be writers. So I'm making a series of videos about new writers, about taking literary technique and applying it to literature and to genre writing, screenplays, nonfiction writing, memoir, things like that. So my experience is specifically an MFA in fiction, in short story and novels, in minimalism. So I'm going to try to make it broader so that people that want to write, say, fantasy can go over these problems. The first problem we did in the video yesterday was that people confuse superficial writing with literary technique. It just simply means they don't understand literary technique. So I made some mistakes in the video saying that you can't teach people anything without literary technique. What I meant was you can't get the benefit of art if you're not using techniques of art, if you're not using literary techniques. So for example, if you do teach through art in a fantasy novel, it's because you're putting literary techniques in it. So I just want to clear that up. That video was really just basically about superficial versus literary technique. And that's a huge distinction that you need to, but probably the second biggest mistake, and this is a funny one that you learn really early on in graduate school, is that you can be too real. So this is huge bit of advice for new writers and for people that are considering writing. Huge warning, don't be too real. So let me give you an example. So in graduate school, we would have graduate students, especially young ones, who would try to duplicate dialogue precisely. They would tape record people talking and then try to duplicate a lot of those elements of that ultra realistic dialogue in their short story. So David Mamet, theater and screenplay writer, script writer, was very aware of the nuance of very realistic language. And so if you're shooting for Mamet as a new writer, you're probably going to make some mistakes, but it is ultra realistic. And what Mamet does is he does really staccato, short, realistic sentences in his dialogue. So when you're writing dialogue, what you want to do in terms of this video is to stay away from ultra realism, which means your dialogue needs to work for your story more than it works for reality. And this is true of almost every literary technique. And that's why this is going to come back to haunt us, but it's just going to be cyclical. But it is very true that specifically with dialogue, you want the dialogue to work for you in terms of the grander expectations that you have for the short story. Let's say it's a short story, rather than just setting the dialogue up on a realistic pedestal. That's the way we used to call it. Because if it's just the dialogue, you're just looking at that and you're saying this better sound exactly like people talk. The problem with doing that is nothing in art mimics life. But a lot of really important quotes do stress this idea that art transcends life in a way, that life is too boring, it's too dry, it's too realistic, and that art has a greater purpose, but realism is important. So when you hear the word verisimilitude, I have no idea what it means, but if you hear it in your graduate program or even in a writing workshop, if you hear the word verisimilitude, it does mean capturing reality. It does mean sounding true. And so it's a double-edged sword because you want it to sound true, but you don't want it to be dry. You don't want it to sound like you're trying to capture two people talking in a boring, lengthy conversation, when your goal is really to do something else with imagery and resonance. Even though the dialogue you put in there can be realistic, you don't want the reader to get lost in that dialogue. And this is true again. This is why it's so important about dialogue. It's true again about every element, is that you don't want people to get lost in how much you take a picture of a scene or a story or an idea, rather than work your artistic magic to create an idea through multiple devices. That's the best way to explain it. So I'm going to leave you with that one for now. And the next one, we're probably going to segue away from problems, and I want to talk about writers' workshops.